So, for most of my life, I've had this bizarre fear of trains. I mean, I guess it's not that bizarre. We are talking about machines that could literally rip you apart in seconds. But it's not a fear I see a lot of people talking about. A few months ago, I got a request to cover the haunted train tracks of San Antonio. When I looked into the legend, I realized I'd already heard it before, and it reminded me why I was ever afraid of trains in the first place. It's a pretty popular legend, so you may have heard of it too. But whether you are visiting or revisiting it, I hope you enjoy hearing about it as much as I enjoyed researching it. The section of the railroad thought to be haunted lies on the intersection of Shane and Villamane roads in San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio residents, as well as others, have been visiting the tracks for years, hoping to catch a glimpse of some very specific paranormal activity. As with most of these ghost stories, there are a couple of different versions, but they're both so detailed and different that I'm just going to share them both. Both stories take place in an unspecified year in the 1930s or 1940s. In the first story, a busload full of children is on its after-school route taking the children home. But the bus stalls on the now famous train tracks, and there's a train coming fast. The driver attempts to get the students off the bus and does manage to save a few, but when the train hits, 10 of the students and the driver are all killed. Okay, that story wasn't very detailed, but this next one is. In the next story, it's nighttime and the kids are returning to school after a field trip. The bus is being driven by a nun, which I never actually envisioned happening, but I guess is possible. No word on whether the school is a Catholic school. When the bus stalls and the train hits, all of the students are killed, but the nun somehow survives. A few weeks later, the nun goes back to the train tracks and decides to kill herself out of guilt. She parks her car on the tracks and waits for a train to come. But as one finally starts coming, she hears voices and her car starts moving forward, seemingly on its own. The car rolls to safety and the nun survives without a scratch. When she examines the back bumper, she sees tiny, child-sized handprints in the dust. The nun later opens up a school for orphans and runs it until she dies, making up for the lives she felt responsible for taking by helping others out in need. Moral of the story: don't stress if you can't make it to the car wash for a few weeks. Whatever the actual story, rumors of hauntings have persisted ever since. Locals have claimed to hear train noises like whistles and wheels screeching when there are no trains scheduled to pass through, as well as children's laughter. Others who live in the neighborhood of the train tracks have claimed to see decapitated chickens in the area and have heard rumors of witchcraft. Another legend associated with this story bears more resemblance to the famous Vanishing Hitchhiker story that's been around for years. In this version, a woman was driving down Shane Road at night and saw a little girl on the side of the road. Thinking the girl was a runaway, the woman offered her a ride. The woman drove back to her house, but once they got there, the girl didn't want to get out of the car. The woman said she would talk to the girl's parents and turned around to go back inside. But when she turned back around to look into the car, the girl was gone. To add a bit more to the whole story and legend, some people point out a couple of different streets in the area, like Cindy Sue Way and Bobby Allen Way, intersecting roads that are both close to Shane Road and have names that sound very childlike. They say that these roads were named after children who died in this bus crash. It is worth noting, though, that there are several intersecting roads in this area that have female-sounding names, like Nancy Carroll or Laura Lee. Nowadays, the tracks attract paranormal enthusiasts both in and out of San Antonio. Ghost hunters will visit the tracks, park their cars 20 to 30 feet away, sprinkle baby powder on the back of the cars, put the car in neutral, and wait. The car will then roll off the tracks, again seemingly on its own, and when the driver or one of their companions inspect the back bumper, they see child-sized fingerprints or handprints in the baby powder. It's as if the child ghosts are pushing them to safety. However, I assume these visitors don't perform the experiment when a train is actually coming, because that would be extremely dangerous. Now, I hate to be a killjoy. Who am I kidding? I love to be a killjoy. But there are a few holes in this urban legend. For starters, no bus crash of this sort has ever happened anywhere near San Antonio. I did a little bit of digging, and by digging, I mean scrolling through Wikipedia, which is the most reliable source on the internet, right? I could only find 2 school bus crashes in the 1930s or 40s that involved collisions with trains. The first one happened in Rockville, Maryland on the night of April 11th, 1935. High school students from Williamsport, about an hour away, were returning home late at night after a chemistry fair when their bus collided with a train. I'm not sure why the driver stopped on the tracks at that particular moment. Maybe he didn't see the train coming, or maybe he thought he could beat it. Nevertheless, 14 of the 27 students on board died in what is still considered one of the worst school bus tragedies in Maryland history. The bus driver was charged with manslaughter, but a grand jury didn't indict him. His license was revoked due to previous driving violations as well as failing to stop on the tracks. But the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was also held partially responsible because they were supposed to have a watchman on guard as well as a safety gate. The crash also inspired political action, with President Roosevelt pledging to spend $200 million to fix dangerous railroads across the country. And if he said he would give money to make railroads safer, he definitely did it. Because no politician has ever promised something and then not followed through. Right? The next crash happened in Salt Lake City, Utah on December 1st, 1938. This one is brought up quite a bit by people discussing the San Antonio legend. And as we'll get to later, a lot of people think this is actually the crash that inspired that legend. It was Salt Lake City's first snowstorm of the year, and the kids were being bused to school around 8:30 that morning. But the driver didn't see the train coming because of thick fog, and 23 students, as well as the driver, were all killed. The crash prompted new safety regulations for buses and trains, including the railroad crossing arms that you still see at train tracks today. When I started looking into the San Antonio legend, I noticed a picture of a newspaper floating around on various blogs and articles. The newspaper article is from the San Antonio Express, and I guess people are using it to show that the San Antonio crash was real. But if you look closely at the print, it's clear this newspaper is talking about the crash in Salt Lake City. I assume it made the front page of a newspaper in San Antonio because it was big enough to make national news, but I don't know for sure. The rest of the legend has been pretty thoroughly debunked as well. A man named Matt DeWelsh, an archivist at the San Antonio Public Library, was credited with this debunking back in 2003. He discovered the Salt Lake City crash and assumed this was the one that inspired the San Antonio legend, though it's not clear how the story took root in a city over 1,000 miles away. He also noted that the fingerprints that became visible after the car was sprinkled with baby powder were prints that were already on the car and were just made visible by the powder. I will admit to being ignorant on the science behind this. On the flip side, I did read a story from a San Antonio woman who claimed she saw child-sized handprints on her car after visiting the tracks, but no children had been in or around her car for a while. Matt DeWelsh isn't the only person who has questioned the legend. There's a video right here on YouTube that shows paranormal investigators visiting the tracks. The hill going up to the tracks looks like it goes uphill, so a car couldn't make it up there on its own. But this is an optical illusion, and the road actually goes downhill. The video shows the road from different angles, and it actually does seem to go downhill. I'll link that video below if you're interested. Even though this legend is probably not true, it has inspired at least one movie. Fingerprints was released back in 2006 and follows a Texas woman named Melanie who moves back in with her parents after leaving rehab. Shortly after her arrival, a string of murders begins, and Melanie sees a ghost girl, somehow entangling her in the mystery of the haunted train tracks. I remember seeing this movie years ago. I mainly watched it because Melanie's sister was played by Kristen Cavallari, and I was a huge Laguna Beach fan. I honestly couldn't even tell you if I liked the movie or not, though general consensus is that it's not that great. In 2016, construction in the area temporarily closed the tracks. In 2018, Union Pacific planned to build new railroads in the area. The planned construction would change the elevation of the tracks so that the legend would no longer work. I assume the road leading up to the tracks would no longer appear to go uphill, but it wasn't really clear from the information I could find. And this was supposed to happen almost a year ago, so I'm not sure what the tracks or the area look like now. At this point, it's clear that the legend is probably not true. But if there really are ghosts at the San Antonio tracks, I doubt a little bit of construction would scare them away. So what do you think of this story of the haunted railroad tracks of San Antonio? Have you ever been there? If you're from San Antonio or have ever lived there or spent a lot of time there, what version of the story did you hear? I'm always interested to hear about these legends from the locals' perspectives. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and share it. And for more dark content, I hope that you will consider subscribing and hitting the bell. Thanks for watching and have a creepy day. Bye guys.